8 years ago, 2014 to be precise, February 2014. It was something we started in pursuit of our commitment to deepen corporate governance best practices in Nigeria and to draw attention to the very all-important and evolving role of the company secretary. We have always had the privilege of welcoming very distinguished and notable, renowned company secretaries over the years, and today is indeed no exception. This year's edition of the Roundtable, which is themed Future Fit, the role of the company, Future Fit Governance, my apologies, the role of the company secretary. We have put together a panel of seasoned corporate governance professionals and company secretaries as discussants, just like the previous editions. We are looking to have a very interactive session, even though we are all going to be virtually participating. We hope that we'll take advantage of what the pandemic has forced on us and be as interactive as possible and try and network also during the course of the morning. Before I introduce our distinguished panel, I would like to take a few seconds to share the ground rules for which will set the tone for the roundtable and to ensure that we have a very impactful session. So very quickly, to ensure that the session is very seamless, we'll appreciate that all participants rename their device. So for instance, you'll see that all of our panelists have their names displayed on the screen. And so would like you to rename your device with your name instead of, say, for instance, Anne's device. You should have Anne Agbo clearly so that we can all see who we have on the session. We'd also like to remind us to please stay muted when we're not speaking during the session to avoid any interference, and also to use the icons on the platform to make a comment or signify that we're raising our hand and all of that. During the course of the session, as questions pop into your mind, we'll encourage you to drop them in the chat box for the Q&A, and then we have set aside a 30-minute time frame within which we'll have question and answers, and we plead that you indicate when you're dropping your message in the chat box which particular discussant you are addressing your question to. We also ask that we all listen and not form judgment until we have heard the opinion of others. Meaning that we shouldn't form judgment until we have heard others speak, and then allow time for the discussions. And then if our views or the thoughts we had were not addressed, and then we could always raise those on the question and in the question and answer section. So we have a total of 2 presentations precisely. We have a keynote address, which will set the tone for the discussion for the day. Each presentation will last for about 15 minutes. All questions arising from this session should please be dropped in the chat box so that we can take those during the time allotted for that discussion. I'll move now quickly to the next slide, which speaks to the program flow for the day. So we have our keynote address. I'm very excited to have Dr. Ashraf Gamal Eldin with us today. He is the CEO of the Okama Institute for Corporate Governance in Dubai. Immediately after that keynote address, I'll welcome our chairman, Mrs. Yewande Zacchaeus. And after her opening remarks, we'll move on to the first presentation for the day, which is on the topic Director Recruitment, any role for the company secretary. And that session will be led by Mr. Rotimi Odushola. Our second presentation on charity in the new normal, which I think is a very germane topic given current realities, will be anchored by Mr. Alsa Adewi. That topic is quite exciting. I'm looking to hear from Mr. Hakim Oguniron. on that topic. And then we then have a moderated Q&A session, which will be anchored by able and distinguished chairman, Mrs. Zacchaeus. And then we'll have the chairman's final remarks, and then our managing director, BC Adeyemi, will close with a vote of thanks. We'll also plead that you oblige us at the end of deploying the virtual feedback for you to give us your thoughts on how the event went. So moving on very quickly to welcoming and introducing Dr. Ashraf, I'd like to quickly welcome Dr. Ashraf. Nike, could you kindly move to the next slide, please? Or allow me to share my screen. Okay, thank you very much. So Dr. Ashraf is someone that we have had the honor and privilege of working with over the last, I would say, 8 or 9 years. And it is indeed my honor to welcome him today and to thank him for accepting to join this very august occasion, our first virtual annual company secretaries roundtable. Dr. Ashraf Damal El Din is the Chief Executive Officer of Hokama. He is a fellow and a certified governance expert from the Chartered Governance Institute, UK. Prior to joining Hokama, Dr. Ashraf was the executive chairman of Egypt Post, and before that, he was the deputy executive director of the Egyptian Banking Institute, the training arm of the Central Bank of Egypt. He was also the executive director of the Egyptian Institute of Directors, the Institute of Corporate Governance in Egypt and the Arab region. Dr. Ashraf served in 2010 in the areas of corporate governance, corporate social responsibility, state-owned and family-owned companies. Dr. Ashraf is a professor of management at the Faculty of Commerce, Cairo University, and holds a PhD from the Manchester University in the United Kingdom and a master's degree in public administration from Carleton University, Canada. He also holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from Cairo University with highest honors. And with that, I would like to warmly welcome Dr. Ashraf to our virtual podium. Over to you, Dr. Ashraf. Nika, if you could please take down the screen. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Anne, for this introduction. I'm really honored and glad to be here with you. I hope that you can all, can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you clearly, Dr. Ashraf.
Okay, thank you so much. Just very briefly, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so just very quickly about our Institute of Corporate Governance. Hokama, actually, it's a government-owned institute in Dubai. So it is owned by the Dubai International Financial Center. And as mentioned, we have been years partnered with the DCSL, and we are very proud to be partners and very happy of the efforts that we are doing together. We work in the area of corporate governance for years. I don't want to take too long of your time. But again, what I would like to say is simply that the crisis, what has been going on in the world in the last year and more, has created some new realities, some new challenges. And what we are sure of is corporate governance will not be the same again. And the role of company secretary will not be the same again. Things will be changing, and they are changing. And that's actually permanently, not just for a temporary time. Now, the crisis has exposed a lot of the assumptions and giving that we used to think about before. And it has also exposed the business models which have been operating for decades, if you like. And it's something which never happened before in history, that we have something of this magnitude. Now, I would like to get back to the key concept, which is very important in getting starting on what's really going on. Now, if you remember Sir Adrian Cadbury in 1992, in his famous report, he defined corporate governance as a system by which companies are directed and controlled. So in fact, in that, we talk about the role of the board of directors in the area of the foresight of the company, the vision, the mission, the corporate culture in the company, the strategy, but also in the area of control and accountability. Now, all these things have been changing and will change. So I'll just give you some highlights of how we see, based on our interaction with boards and directors, what's actually changing and how this will affect the role of the company secretaries. Now, one of the first things which we have witnessed is the relationship between the board and the management. Now, if you remember, in the old days, what we used to say is there are sort of two extremes we see actually happening. Now, at one extreme, we have seen the passive boards which are, hands off completely. They are not following up what's happening with the management. CEOs are fully empowered and they make whatever they'd like to do. They are either entrusted or because the board does not have the time or the experience, so they are passive boards. And then we used to see the operating board, in which sometimes you have intervention from the board or the chairman with the management, so it's sort of overlapping. And we have always advised companies to have the engaged board, but in fact, this is not valid anymore. So now this is actually a serious challenge, because what we have seen in the crisis, which is very normal outcome, is boards stepping into the area of operations. Now, boards are more and more engaging with the management in making decisions which were previously made by the management. So now the question of liability is something which is changing considerably. Now, who is liable for what's going on? So if something goes on wrong, now the CEOs are overwhelmed. So they see it's way too much for them to handle alone. So the boards get engaged, and then you start to have all this mix happening. Previously, we used to say this is wrong, but in fact, now we cannot say this anymore because it's too much for one person with his team to handle what's going on. So this is one of the key changes which is happening right now, which is boards getting engaged in operational issues, but then diluting the responsibility of the management. Now, the strategy is something else, which is, again, it's changing considerably, that we see in companies here. For example, now what we used to see before is simply that the CEO will get inputs from the boards on the challenges and the opportunities and the vision, and then they go back and work to have some sort of a 5-year plan for the board. Now, can we do this now? No. What's happening now is companies are facing crisis. So in fact, the key question is not for like 3 or 5 years. The question is, can we survive this year or not? Can we really survive the amount of risks and challenges that we are facing in our company or not? So boards now are focusing more on the crisis. The long term is some sort of absent. So now again, here is a key role for the company secretary, that they actually have to influence the agenda of the board, and they have to try to keep this focus of long-term vision as well. So yes, it is important that we focus on the crisis, but then it's good also to have some sort of vision of the longer term. And then the company secretary, he or she plays the key role in the communication between the board and the management. So the idea of trying to solicit this sort of cooperation and solicit the brainstorming and the discussions and the agreements, and trying to make sure that the board is really discussing all the issues that they have to be discussing in the area of strategy and risks, that's really quite important. And then at the end of the day, we used to say that before, that the board owns the strategy. Now we cannot say this anymore. It's actually the CEO and the board together, they own the strategy, and they have together to work on updating it on a very regular basis. Now, previously, we do this once a year. Now we cannot. So the company secretary has to make sure that at least every board meeting we update on the strategy, on the risks, on the changes, on what's really going on in the markets around us. Now, one of the points which Anne mentioned in the morning is actually virtual meetings. Now, what we are sure of is virtual meetings are here to stay. So even when this pandemic is over, hopefully soon, inshallah, the idea of having virtual meetings is just going to continue. It's quite important. But this will actually put much more burden on the company secretary, because the whole idea of virtual has different things, different elements. Now, one element is before the meeting itself, making sure that we are ready for that. Now, ready is not only by technology, for example. Ready is even by legal issues, by our own articles of association, by our own systems. Are we really ready to have virtual meetings or not? Now, the relationship between the company secretary and the chairman is very different now. So the idea of just creating the agenda with him or trying to follow up on the topics, that's not only what's required. But what also is required is simply technology issues, tips, how to use the technology, how to handle the challenges of virtual meetings, how to control lots of things in the meetings. That's also something which is very important. Now, what we have witnessed also is during the meeting itself, controls are not as strong as before, which means now previously you used to have a physical room where you know who is coming and who is leaving and who is recording and what's happening. Now, with the virtual, things are much more difficult. So how to make the best use of the time of the people and the company secretary's role in controlling that item with the chairman is extremely important. And of course, always learning from what happened. So the company secretary has a role to start to assess and look back at what has been going on and looking forward to how can we improve our meetings and make it more effective in the future. However, the last thing we would like to see is to see that we are doing the same thing of the regular meetings into virtual meetings. That's not really it. So the whole idea is re-examining the approach of meetings. Now, we have seen some of the boards that went virtual, still conducting like 3 or 4 hour meetings. That's not really acceptable. So what's happening right now is few things which we have to pay attention to, and the company secretary has the major role to play there. Number one is the idea of security. Now, many companies have jumped into platforms with the pandemic which were not secured. So that put the company at risk because you have lots of confidential documents and information shared over platforms which are not really, secured and safe and can be easily penetrated by maybe, hackers or by other companies and so on. So this is very important. The second thing is the ground rules for our meetings. How are we going to conduct these meetings? So there has to be some sort of approved policy by the board on virtual meetings. It's not just like a meeting like this. No, we have lots of rules of how to interfere, how to leave, how to jump in. Should we leave our cameras on? Should we leave it off? Muting, unmuting, all that stuff has to be rules which are adhered to by every board member. Now, the idea of technology and the problems may mean that I must have IT all the time standing by to support me and the board members, because usually you'll have somebody who cannot hear, you cannot see him or whatever. Then we have to be ready to face that sort of situation. Now, on the agenda, that's something else. We used to see agendas before where you have like 10, 15 topics on the agenda. Now you cannot do this anymore. So I have to look back and see the priorities. Maybe now we can have more frequently meetings. Maybe instead of 6 every year, maybe I can have actually maybe 7 or 8 or 9 or 10. But then we have shorter meetings in which we discuss less number of topics in less time, because people lose their concentration if they stay too long on time. Now, also the idea of wasting time in presentations. The company secretary has to make sure that the files get out to the people on time. And now you have lots of digital platforms which are secure that you can use. Many companies offering this service. So they have to get these files early, and they have to read and even be allowed to make comments and discuss before the board meeting itself. So many of these platforms offer that idea of comments or commenting or writing something or asking questions, getting more information. All this will save the time of the board itself after that. That's really clearly extremely important. Now, one of the things actually which we have seen before in some of the meetings is, sometimes, for example, we were asked to interfere in meetings and then they give us a link. And we would go there to find out that this is the wrong time. So they have discussed something which is very confidential and nobody noticed that actually we are there. So the idea of controlling who gets in, who gets out, somebody has to be watching what's really happening and who is jumping in, and whether you have the link valid all the time or just for a certain time and so on. That's something, again, which adds more trouble and more tasks to the company secretary, and of course, more skills required in that respect. Now, the area of risk is an area where, again, boards are different, management and also company secretary rules different. Now, if you look at the risk which happened last year, the idea of survival was extremely important, liquidity and cash management and health and safety as well. Now, in a survey that was done actually in the last quarter of last year, board of directors said that the key risk they are facing now is the reaction of governments to COVID, not COVID itself. Because it's not really about the COVID, it's about how governments are doing to respond to that. So whether you're closing down, banning travels, restricting access to certain places, all this will affect you. Supply chain and disruption and business continuity. That's something which is also extremely important that's happening right now. Now, one of the key things which we used to say before is, you know, you have the management taking care of risk management and the board overseeing that. Now, from history, what happened, which is the closest thing to what we are going through right now, is 2008 crisis. In that, there was a study that was done 2011 and 2012 and then 2014 by Nestor Advisors in the UK on actually updating what really happened. Some of the banks made profits out of the crisis and they grew out of the crisis. What they found out is they did have specialized committees, risk committee, which made in one case, which is Santander, every week. So every week, this board committee met with the management to discuss what's happening, what's going on, how can we face the challenges, how can we do better, and how can we respond to what the changes. So in this time, the company secretary cannot afford with the board to wait for like 3 months or 2 months to discuss. This has to be done very frequently, and the company secretary must make sure that this link between the board and the management is taking place, and there are recommendations taken back to the board on what can we do in the future. Corporate culture is something which is under test right now, because the problem is culture is something you cannot really touch with your hand, but you can feel it. So the culture of responsibility, of ethical standards, this is the test right now, because in crisis, people tend to try to take shortcuts. You try to achieve your objective. So the board has to decide on what culture we would like to emphasize. Is it the culture of being responsible, taking care of our employees, our people, our clients, and being ethical and transparent and honest, or the culture of achieving financial targets and trying to make the best out of it, regardless of the price of doing that? So the company secretary must make sure that the idea of culture and the concept is actually on the agenda of the board, and the board decides on the right measures to make sure that we have the right culture and we are enforcing that. Attracting the right investors, again, is a key thing. Now, in the letter which was written by BlackRock a couple of days back to the CEOs of companies, saying that now we need you to disclose not only, for example, the percentage of women on your boards, but what you are doing to have gender diversity on your company as well, your top management, and the idea of environmental protection and social protection. So now we are responsible for that. So if the company is willing to attract good long-term investors, you would have to think of these things. Yes, liquidity is important, but then your culture, your competencies on the board, your commitment, and how are we discussing this? So again, company secretaries must make sure that the board is discussing the idea of ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance, sustainability in a wider sense, because that's how you attract investors in this time of crisis. Now, people think that this is something for the developed markets. No, we have an index here in the MENA region that we have been running in Hawkama with S&P for 11 or 12 years, and we have a new index in the UAE. The numbers show clearly that ESG companies, they outperform the rest of the companies. So when companies are committed to environmental corporate governance practices, they have better share price and they have better ROI for companies that invest in them. The final slide I will have is this one. Now, as you know, the board of directors has two key roles to play. They are watchdog, they are supervising and overseeing the management, assessing its performance, but they are also acting as a sounding board. Sounding board means you support the management. You are acting as a think tank for the management, as experts for the management. Now, this is the time of creating trust and working with the management and trying to be supportive to the management. It's very challenging and very overwhelming for the CEO, the management, to handle all this alone. Now, it's time to be supportive. Again, this has to be reflected on the board meetings, on the agendas, on the topics, and on the way we are interacting with the management. So again, that's all a lot of effort, a lot of work for the company secretaries, but again, there is no other way of doing it than this. Sorry if I was a little bit long, but I'm really happy to discuss with you, and if you have any questions, I'm ready to answer them. Thank you so much, and back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ashraf. Thank you so much for that very brilliant keynote address. Something that I took quite a keen interest in was is about the fact that virtual meetings have given the company secretaries more work for us, the company secretary. Incidentally, it's less work, ideally more for the company. And the solution you have preferred of striking a balance between the frequency of board meetings and the length of time of those board meetings is very, very critical. I know that some boards, the meeting have become very length in the comfort of their homes. But I will not dwell too much on that. I'm sure that this is something that will come up during the discussions as we. I'd like to now very quickly introduce our chairman for today. I'll take a second to share my screen. Come her to the virtual podium and technically hand over. So Mrs. Yewande Zaccheaus is a lawyer, banker, and an entrepreneur. She obtained her law degree from the University of Lagos and her master's in law from Cambridge University. Yewande started her career first as a practicing lawyer and then as the company secretary legal advisor of EcoBank Nigeria PLC from 1989 to 2002. She's the CEO and founder of Eventful, which is regarded as the pioneer and market leader in the relatively new field of events management and consulting. The business was recently expanded to include venue management, and Eventful is proud to be the manager of Harbour Point VI Lagos. Mrs. Zaccheaus is the founding trustee and past chairman of Women in Management and Business, WIMBIS. She is the 2011 recipient of the prestigious, the 2015 recipient of This Day newspaper's Game Changer Award for being the pioneer and game changer in the event planning industry in Nigeria. Those of us who know her will definitely identify with that particular award. She serves as a director and on the boards of several companies, including Data Guard Management Company Limited, Beyond Credit Microfinance Bank Limited, Zaki and Chrome Limited, and Funda Wazi Limited. She's the chairman of Hartley Supermarket Limited and a member of the Nigerian France Investment Club. Mrs. Zaccheaus was a member of the Governing Council of the Lagos State University from 2015 to 2020 and will today chair the session and moderate our discussions. It is indeed with great honor and pleasure that I welcome Mrs. Yewande Zaccheaus, the chairman of today's occasion. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anne. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And I first of all must thank Dr. Ashraf Kamel Eldin for that excellent keynote presentation. I found it extremely useful because it wasn't only for company secretaries, but I think even as a director on boards, I gained a lot of insight and valuable knowledge. So thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to DCSL's 8th Company Secretary Roundtable, Future Fit Governance, the role of the Company Secretary. I must admit that when Ms. Bisi Adeyemi asked me if I would chair and moderate this roundtable, my first response was hearty laughter and then a resounding no way, as I reminded her that I left the company secretarial world almost 20 years ago when I resigned from EcoBank Nigeria in 2002 after serving as the company secretary and legal advisor for 13 years. As you have heard, I have been an entrepreneur since then. However, she would not take no for an answer, and I also was actually quite intrigued by the prospect of engaging with this distinguished panel on a subject of which I do have some knowledge and experience, but it would give me an opportunity to learn what's new in the field and thereby expand my horizons in this area. Clearly, even as we have heard from the keynote address, the company secretary's role has evolved over the years. And I'm actually quite surprised that the title is still yet to be changed, as the term company secretary seems to pigeonhole the role somewhat, in my view. Today, company secretaries are no longer mere administrative record keepers or, in inverted commas, servants to the board of directors, but they are now highly respected professional advisors on issues of governance, on the law, business ethics and practice, strategic communications, and they are networkers par excellence, and a whole lot more. The COVID-19 pandemic and its resultant effect on the workforce has forced us all to work remotely and rely extensively on technology in all our dealings. All this, of course, comes with its own risks regarding confidentiality and cybersecurity, and this is our major threat to all organizations and a threat which the company secretary must rise to mitigate. We will today be discussing the topics: director recruitment, any role for the company secretary, safeguarding confidentiality in the new normal, and finally, career progression from company secretary to board chair. You, the participants, are extremely fortunate as all your speakers are seasoned and experienced professionals from whom you will gain valuable insights and very useful practical nuggets of wisdom for you to go and be your best professional selves. So having set the context for our discussions and without revealing all, I would like to invite the panelists to make their presentations, after which we will have an interactive Q&A session, as Anne has said. And I trust that you will all leave this roundtable better equipped to handle your roles and responsibilities in your respective organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Thank you for that beautiful welcome speech. I'd like to now not waste time, but very quickly introduce. We're running a bit. I'd like to now very quickly introduce the speaker, the first speaker for the LAM. Any role for excited to hear what Mr. Odushola is going to say about that. Mr. Rotimi Odushola qualified as a legal practitioner and was called to the 1993. He started his career with the prestigious law firm of Aluku and Oyebode, where he worked till February 2003 and left out here in Nigeria Communications Limited, contributing to the development and strengthening of the legal and regulatory function of the company and rising to the position of senior manager, commercial legal, and deputy head of the legal department. In November 2014, Mr. Odushola joined the Diageo Group, where he currently holds the position of legal director and company secretary of Guinness Nigeria PLC. He also has held the role of company secretary, legal advisor to Diageo Brands Nigeria Limited. Mr. Odushola has served as acting corporate relations director for Guinness Nigeria PLC, with oversight of a wide spectrum of stakeholder relationships, managing cutting across government agencies, regulatory bodies, and public institutions. He is a member of the Nigerian Bar Association, particularly the section on Business Law and Corporate Counsel Forum, the International Bar Association, as well as the Association of Corporate Counsel. He is also a member of the Institute of Chartered Sector of Directors Nigeria. With that, a warm welcome to Mr. Odushola as he comes to the virtual podium. Welcome, sir, and over to you now.
Thank you very much, Anne, and good morning, everyone. I'm indeed pleased to be here to be part of this fantastic session. I hope you can all hear me, and can you kindly confirm if you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. I've got a few slides to speak to, but I'm actually going to be sharing with, I believe, the very distinguished audience that we have, what my own experience has been on the subject of whether or not there is a role for the company secretary, the modern day company secretary, in the recruitment of directors. And I think it's important to emphasize that this is in the context of where we are currently all over the world with regards to how things are evolving and evolving very quickly. Dr. Gamal Eldin has showed us how important it is for us as company secretaries to assume that role that has now manifested for company secretaries of being governance practitioners, governance professionals, rather than just administrative support to the board. And what that means is that the role is become much more important. And if we look at the fact that the COVID-19 situation has meant that things like strategy and risk management now has to be relooked at a lot more frequently than they ever were, then we will all appreciate the importance of ensuring that we do have frequent interactions with our board, as well as on this specific subject, perform what I believe is an important role in the recruitment onto the board of new directors. So like I said, I'm going to be sharing a lot of my own experience, but I'm also going to be speaking, to some of the, the roles that have been assigned to company secretary, statutorily, the roles that are given to company secretary in the areas of regulations, but also, we now have, many important factors now guiding how companies, operate, not the least of which is the Code of Corporate Governance. And there are roles in there as well that the company secretary has to perform, specifically speaking to this subject of the recruitment of directors. Now, I'm not going to focus only on recruitment, because for HR practitioners, recruitment will simply mean, you find someone and then you put that person into a role that's been defined. I'm going to speak more, about not just the recruitment, but also the importance of the role of the company secretary to the board in the succession planning and the management of the succession planning of the company. And so you'd find that the slides that I have to share, which I've just highlighted in terms of this setup, will deal with that. So firstly, when we talk in terms of the statutory provisions, what is the role of the company secretary? The newcomer 2020 has provided a definition for us, and CAMAS defines who can assume that position of company secretary. In my own opinion, I think maybe there might be some inelegance in the drafting of section 330 because it's possible to read this as suggesting that you have to be all of these things to be a company secretary, namely a member of the Institute of Charter Secretaries and Administrators. And by the way, I think the first thing I should say about that is the fact that even the Chartered Institute of Administrators in Nigeria recognizes the importance of the role of company secretaries. And at the last annual general meeting of the Institute, a resolution was passed directing the leadership of the Institute to pursue the change of its name to better reflect the importance of the role of company secretaries to, chartered, I believe, chartered governance professionals, something along those lines, if my memory serves me right. So it tells us that the responsibilities that we have as company secretaries now goes beyond serving the board or arranging meetings. It's actually one where we are to perform as gatekeepers for corporate governance, because corporate governance has become a lot more important to the survival of companies. If you look at the frequency with which strategy and risk management has to be revisited by the board. So moving on, the duties of a company secretary under section 335 of CAMA include maintaining the registers that the company is supposed to keep, and other records, includes rendering, proper returns, includes giving notifications to the commission, that's the Corporate Affairs Commission, and regulators, and some other administrative, things I would describe as administrative and secretarial duties as directed by the Board of Directors. But I'd like for us to pay attention to section 335, subsection 2, because therein lies the, the facilitator of what I'd like to share with you, namely that the company secretary shall not, without the authority of the board, exercise any of the powers vested in the directors. So the reason why I'm emphasizing this and calling our attention to it is to say that the responsibility for recruiting directors onto the board actually falls on the board itself. If there are vacancies, in between annual general meetings, casual vacancies that need to be filled either on account of resignations or, some other form of departure from the board. Bearing in mind, though, especially for publicly quoted companies, that the board will not exceed the number of, directors that should be on the board as defined in the articles of association of the company. But this provision says that the company secretary will not exercise any of those powers except as directed by the board. And in my experience, what this connotes is that the nominations committee of the company, especially publicly quoted companies, as now required under the Code of Corporate Governance and under the provisions of the Companies and Allied Matters Act, may, in fact, in the course of doing its own job of finding and recruiting appropriate candidates for appointment onto the board, also direct the company secretary to take some of those responsibilities on its behalf. Now, I have to warn that this is not an expectation that can be assumed. And in my opinion, I believe it is only available to a company secretary that has demonstrated the capacity and has earned the trust of the board of directors. So if as a company secretary, you have performed your role, performed your responsibilities, you have advised the board, you have been a gatekeeper for corporate governance, you have been a facilitator of what the board ought to do, you will earn that trust. And I believe it is the trust that you've earned as a professional that will put you in the right stead to be delegated with some of the responsibilities of the nominations committee in the recruitment and appointment of directors. So in a nutshell, there is an important role for the company secretary to play in the recruitment of directors. However, it is only available to company secretaries that have demonstrated and have earned the trust of the board of directors. So we've spoken about the evolution of the role of the company secretary, and there's just one quote from Dr. Marvin King. A lot of us will be familiar with Dr. King, if you are familiar with the King 1, King 2, King 3 report from South Africa. And he said, the company secretary today also has to be a networker, intellectually honest, a business analyst, and a good communicator, as well as having boardroom presence. He or she has to understand that the resources used by the company and the relationships with its stakeholders are interdependent and interconnected. The term company secretary has become outdated in the modern governance of companies. More appropriately, this person should be called the governance officer, unquote. And Mrs. Zakios just, I don't know whether Mrs. Zakios saw these slides before, but she's also alluded to the fact that it's no longer fashionable to even be describing the governance professionals that are responsible for managing the board. That's how I would describe a company secretary, a modern day company secretary, to be referred to simply as that. And this quote, just put it quite aptly, and also speaks to some of the things that Dr. Gamal Eldin has shared with us in his keynote address. So, as a corporate governance gatekeeper, what actually are some of those things in the evolution of the role of the company secretary? So I'm going to speak very briefly about these things that I have in the bubbles here, and then I will delve into what I believe should be the role of the company secretary in the recruitment and appointment of a director onto the board. So the responsibility for developing and implementing the processes that promote and sustain good corporate governance now falls largely within the remit of the company secretary. So you have to empower yourself as a company secretary. You have to be familiar with what is extant in terms of best practices in corporate governance across the world, not just in Nigeria, and be in a position you have that presence in the board, you have that reputation, you've earned that trust of your chairman and members of the board to be able to guide them and have a strong voice to say, this is how we should do things. No, this is not how we should do things. And remember, the theme of the DCSL, Company Secretaries Roundtable is actually future fit governance. So we're speaking about the future, but the future is no longer 10 years down the line, as Dr. Eldin shared with us. The future now is like every quarter. Any company that wants to survive the current vicissitudes and the volatility that we're seeing across the world must be dynamic enough, must be agile enough to revisit its strategies for the business, is revisit its risk management profile literally every quarter. So I would counsel that every company secretary should see the quarterly board meeting, if not more frequently, as an opportunity for the board to review what it's doing in terms of the risk and the strategy that the organization has. So the company secretary has the company's compliance and regulatory responsibility. You've got to be the one ensuring that not just in your role, but across the business, all of the compliance and regulatory responsibilities are being fulfilled. The communication with stakeholders and shareholders, company secretaries are now the face of the business when it comes to interaction with investors and analysts. And you must be with shareholders, you must be at the front, and you must be the one ensuring that the best foot of your organization is being put forward at every opportunity. Understanding the dynamics of interacting with different groups of stakeholders is extremely important in this regard. You must be an advisor and a confidant to the board, supporting the board chairman and the committee chairman, because of course you also know that the responsibility of supporting all of the committees of the board falls on the company secretary. The interface between the management and the board is also the responsibility of the company secretary. The chairman will call and want information at intervals that are not defined, and you must be familiar with what is going on with the management of the business in order to respond to those inquiries. Then the disclosure responsibilities, and also a very important thing, the assessment and evaluation of the board. It's something that the company secretary, the modern day company secretary, must manage dexterously. And then board training and capacity development also is a responsibility, as well as managing all of the board committees and processes. So this is to lay the background for what we're going to now speak about, especially related to the process of managing the succession planning of the board, which includes the recruitment of a director onto the board. So the company secretary plays this very important role in succession planning, and it includes assisting with and developing what I describe as a skills matrix, and a recruitment process document. So a skills matrix will be one where you map out what are the skills required for the members of the board in order for the board to be effective in its responsibilities of oversight on the company. Depending on the industry in which your business is, there will be technical skills requirement, there will be skills requirement related to strategy, related to government relations, and so on and so forth, related to finance. So you've got to play that role in succession planning and board management to ensure that there is that balance. You don't have a board that everyone is a technical expert. You need to have the right balance, and that's part of the responsibility of the company secretary in advising the board in recruitment matters. And then in conjunction with the board committee that's responsible for this, mostly in most companies it will be the nominations committee. You also be reviewing the appointment process for directors in the context of the provisions of CAMA, of the provisions of the company's memo and articles, of the board charter. Every company must have a board charter, and the board charter will have provisions regarding recruitment and appointment. So you are ensuring that the process is managed with due cognizance to all of those provisions. The various codes of corporate governance also are very important, and you have to be the one putting all of this together in advising the board. So back to what I said about earning the trust of your organization. If you don't have that trust. You just find that one day you are being told that, oh, we have a new director who is joining us, and you are not even involved in the process. And that would be a shame for any modern day company secretary. The board may also, delineate the role of the board's nominations committee in the selection of directors, and this can be clarified in the responsibilities that are given to the committee. So I'm going to speak briefly about the next two slides. I've just kind of highlighted what I believe are relevant provisions of CAMA, as well as relevant provisions of what I've pulled out as samples of the articles of associations of some companies. Section 274 of CAMA talks about the board appointing new directors to fill vacancies. And then where the vacancies are filled by directors, the person may be approved at the next annual general meeting. There is a responsibility, there's a role for the company secretary to play there, because you have to ensure that if a director has been appointed in the course of the year, part of your resolutions to be approved at the AGM includes the approval of that appointment. In many articles of association, you will find clauses such as the directors have the powers at any time from time to time to appoint new persons and so on and so forth. This will be reflective of the provisions of CAMA already on the subject. And then similarly, in board charters, you would find provisions related to changes to the structure, size, and composition of the board and its committees. You would find provisions related to appointment to the board, that being based on the recommendations of the nomination committee. And finally, in the terms of reference of the committee itself, there will also be provisions related to the process to follow in the recruitment of new directors. So where does the company secretary come in? If you are a trusted company secretary, and that must be the first focus area for all of us as company secretaries, then you will have a very important role to play in all of this. The first being that we should recognize that there is no one-size-fits-all approach, and depending on the provisions of the terms of reference of the committee, of the board charter, as long as the provisions of CAMA and the relevant codes are being complied with, boards may take different approaches. But it is typical that the process will include sourcing for a prospective candidate to be recruited onto the board. And in this situation, if you have earned the trust of the board and of the committee responsible for this, it is not impossible that you will be saddled with, finding or coming up with a list of potential candidates. You may decide to use a professional firm for that purpose, or perhaps using defined criteria. You have a network that you can lean on and say, who are the potential candidates that fill this, that meet this criteria? And then there will be preliminary engagements to be undertaken with the prospective candidates. We have to bear in mind that regardless of how reputable your organization may be, not everyone would want to be a director of your organization. So any potential candidate that is worth its salt will also want to know more about the company, more about the dynamics of the organization. And the first person to interact with might in fact be you as the company secretary, because you will have that interface. So for example, they might be requesting for some information about what's going on about the company. So respecting the rules of confidentiality, that role is there for the company secretary to play in engaging those preliminary engagements. Then supporting the board committee in carrying out the detailed and discreet due diligence that needs to be done on the prospective candidate. So you want to be sure that the person that you are bringing onto your board is fit, not just qualified, but fit. You do not want to disrupt the dynamics that exist on the board, and there are nuances that would need to be considered, and those things need to be taken into consideration. And then the company secretary will also be the one to facilitate a session where the nominations committee would meet and interact with the potential, or the selected candidates before a decision around recommendation to the board for appointment is made. You have to be that visible. I've had the experience of actually being part of the process, not on one occasion, not on two occasions. And it's been a really, it's satisfying experience to know that you have that level of confidence in your from your board. And then finally, supporting the board committee in its review and recommendation. So there are times that you have one vacancy to fill, but there are potentially 2 or 3 candidates that meet the requirements. That process where the committee sits down to say who's the best to go for in the circumstances is one that should be mediated by the company secretary. Then what are the key considerations for the company secretary itself in performing this support role to the board committee? So as a company secretary that's earned the trust to be in that position, you want to be able to take due cognizance of the diversity and inclusion objectives of your organization. So you are looking at what you already have on the board and whether or not the candidates you are bringing in will improve those objectives, those targets. And you know that those things are now important for businesses these days. The independence of the candidate, there are very strict definitions in the codes of corporate governance around independent candidates, independent directors of the board on the board, and therefore you have to be the one to ensure that the board is taking a decision that meets those criteria. The technical competence, is easily accessible, but again, it's something that should be factored into consideration. Then I call something here the demographic balance on the board. It could be around spread, it could be around age. You don't want to have a board that is, full of only people in a certain generation, and, depending on the area of business that you are in, you are struggling to understand, or the board will be struggling to understand how certain people of certain age demography think, and therefore the business is not successful in that regard. And then succession planning, I put that in the middle of all of this because it's actually the responsibility of the company secretary to ensure that, there is an adequate succession plan for the board. Unlike the directors who are tenured, the company secretary's role is not tenured. And therefore, you may be the one that lasts the longest on the board. That is if you don't make it onto the board or as a chairman yourself at some point. But you have to ensure that you don't have a situation where half of your directors are all going to retire at the same time, because there hasn't been adequate succession planning. The candidate suitability beyond their technical competence is also important. And then, of course, the size of the board. You look at the relative size of the business that you do and decide whether or not you want to have a board of 10 or a board of 15, or maybe a board of 7 or 8 is just suitable for you. And I've just got 2 more slides where I'm going to talk about what happens at the appointment stage and the post-appointment stage in terms of the responsibilities that we have as company secretaries. Firstly, I would even say pre-appointment, I've spoken about provision of relevant information and response to inquiries from an incoming candidate. During the appointment stage, you also support the presentation of the new director for appointment to the board. This will typically be done by the chairman of the committee that's responsible for nomination. Then you are responsible for drafting and ensuring the execution of a service contract or a letter of appointment. This is extremely important, especially for publicly quoted companies, because it's a contractual relationship that has to be adequately documented. And that is the responsibility of the company secretary in the appointment process. And then also arranging a facility tour, arranging the induction process. You might need to be the one responsible for facilitating an engagement between the new director and your trade partners, your customers or distributors, depending on the area of the business that your company is involved in. Then post-appointment, in terms of roles and responsibility and the importance of it, the new director needs to go through an induction program. The company secretary is the most suitable management executive to organize a comprehensive induction for a new director. You are the one that introduces the new director to all of the members of senior management who are not members of the board. It's important that this is done in a way that the director feels properly inducted into the business and feels part of the organization. And then ensuring the ratification of the director's appointment at the next AGM, I've spoken about that, ensuring timely regulatory filings and ensuring timely notification to regulators, stock exchange, the NSE, and depending on the industry you are in, sectoral regulators as well. We all know that in certain industries, you know, the regulator of the sector is heavily involved in who becomes a director, such as in banking, for example. So that also a post-appointment responsibility for the company secretary. And then notification to the investing public. Dr. Elden spoke about how it's important for a company secretary to be dexterous at communication. So you might decide it's a newspaper publication, it's a press release, you put it on the website of your organization, you engage with your different publics, the different stakeholder groups that you have to manage to ensure that this appointment process is not only seamless, but the director is, you know, accepted into the stakeholder community of the organization. Lastly, in conclusion, I want to say that in echoing what have been said, by all of the speakers so far, the company secretary is no longer an administrative servant to the board. He's now an advisor to the board. Is a governance professional with the responsibility for ensuring the compliance with good corporate governance by the organization. And therefore, it's important that as company secretary, you must strive to be a trusted confidant. You must demonstrate dexterity in your trade. The board must trust you to take into confidence, to give you responsibilities, to listen to the advice that you provide in a manner that helps the organization. And then finally, the company secretary is someone who is himself has to be ready and willing to speak up and advocate and uphold good corporate governance practices. You have to have empowered yourself to be able to guide the board, if it is necessary, with a strong voice. Say, look, this is not, even if it is permitted by law, it's not a future fit governance practice, and therefore it's not the way we should be going as an organization. But I will go back to the statement I've made about trust. If you haven't earned the trust, you're not going to be able to perform this responsibility. I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Odushola. Thank you for very clearly setting out the path that a company secretary should take to providing support to the board on the recruitment of a director. I like the fact, for me, the very striking point that you have raised, which we all as company secretaries must take on board, is the fact that we have the responsibility of discharging this duty of director recruitment. And then I found all the key contributions that you raised very interesting: diversity, independence, suitability, the culture fit, and all of that. Thank you very much, sir. We're running quite significantly behind time, so I'm sure that we'll have enough time, hopefully, in the Q&A session to discuss at some great length some of the issues that a lot of people will have on their minds after listening to you. So without further ado, I'd like to quickly invite Mr. Alausa Adewi, who is going to be speaking with us on the topic of safeguarding confidentiality in the new normal. I think that's a very germane topic for us, particularly in these times. I would like to share my screen for a second so I can share Mr. Adewi's profile with us. Mr. Adewi is an accomplished legal practitioner with over 23 years post-call experience, 20 years of which represent hands-on experience in the financial services industry, handling the wide spectrum of financial services, legal company secretariat related services. His professional career commenced with Olawoyin and Olawoyin legal practitioners, where he was an associate. He was part of the team in the firm when Professor G. Olawoyin was admitted into the inner bar in 1998. His banking career kicked off with the United Bank for Africa, where he functioned as a legal officer. Mr. Adewi had an extensive banking experience in Intercontinental Bank PLC after resigning from UBA, where he rose to the position of deputy manager. And during the same period, he functioned as a company secretary to Intercontinental Properties Limited, a subsidiary of Intercontinental Bank PLC. He also acted as company secretary of the bank before moving to Kakawa Discount House Limited, now FBN Quest Merchant Bank Limited. He held the position of the company secretary and head legal services at FBN Quest Merchant Bank for 9 years. Mr. Adeoye holds a first degree in law from the Obafemi Awolowo University, a BL from the Nigerian Law School, and an LLM from the University of London. He's an alumni of the Lagos Business School, having gone through the Senior Management Program, and a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Secretaries and Administrators of the UK and Nigeria. Currently, is the company secretary of ARM Holding Company Limited. A warm welcome to Mr. Adeoye as I invite him to the podium. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, DSL, for this wonderful opportunity. It's actually a privilege to be called to share this platform. I will try and share my slides. Let's see how I can quickly do that. Okay, I've been asked to speak about confidentiality in the new normal. And it's a very interesting topic that we are all grappling with. And I hope you can see my screen. Can you?
Not yet, sir.
Okay, just give me a minute, please. Okay, so I'll be speaking about confidentiality in the new normal. New normal being what has happened to us after the pandemic that we were all here prepared for. I will not be maybe speaking to you about things that you have not heard before. I hope you can see my screen now. Hello, please, can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, we can. Yes, absolutely. Yes, we can, sir.
Thank you so much. So I will not be speaking to you about things you've not heard before. What I intend to do is just to stimulate our minds and then draw attention to issues that we normally take for granted so that we see how serious it has become. So to grapple with this topic, I look for the simplest form of definition. And I actually went to the Oxford dictionary, English dictionary, and it just defined confidentiality as a state of keeping or being kept secret or private, which means that confidentiality is something we are supposed to have control over, either in the people that have it or people that can see it or people that we can share it with. And also for information to be actually confidential, to be useful to us, it needs to be accessible, it needs to be accurate, it needs to be correct, and it needs to be safeguarded. So what type of information do we consider confidential? Personal information, data on staff, proprietary information, that's trade secrets, and then customer information. And especially customer information is what is actually at risk in these times that we are in. So when we look at the corporate governance code, we'll see where the corporate governance code actually mentioned the importance of the role of company secretary. Mr. Odushola has actually dwelt on that a lot. And one of the importance of the company secretary is information flow, how you ensure that information passes between the board and the management, top management and the board, and then all the other stakeholders, particularly when you are a PLC. That is especially very, very important. And that information, like I said, it must be available when required. It must be accurate because once you lose that trust, you may never regain it. So to also underscore the importance of confidentiality, if you look at section 334 of CAMA, you will notice that the company secretary does not ordinarily have a fiduciary relationship with the company. However, when you look at that section, when the company secretary is acting in some instances, it becomes fiduciarily responsible to the company. And one of those cases where he becomes fiduciarily responsible is when he's using the information available to him on the board for private purposes. Now, I will try, while I'm trying to just define what confidentiality means and the importance, I will just refer to one or two things there. Now, the first point on the slide there says that a 50-year-old company can be destroyed within days if there's a breach of confidentiality. Last year, while discussing, was actually preparing for listing on the London Stock Exchange, and then they had a hit. Somebody hacked into their system, and the company that was preparing for listing on the stock exchange went down within 2 weeks, and they filed for bankruptcy. That is how important confidentiality is to our company. So with the advent of remote working from home, working with our devices, this risk actually became more heightened. And so, like Mr. Odushola said, and then Dr. Ashraf, information is moving a lot across several platforms. Now, because we were not prepared for what happened during the pandemic, a lot of us just jumped on platforms that were not secure. They were free, and so we thought, oh, Christmas came early, and then we jumped on it. What those platforms are open to everybody like it was open to us, and people can actually view our information. If you want to try what I'm saying, maybe get your IT department to just go to what they call the black web and search for information on your company. You may be surprised at what you will see there. Examples I've given here is the NHS in London, Yahoo, when they had their security breaches. Now, these are big institutions, and because of their systemic importance, they may have recovered. What happens to a small company like my friend's and client's company that had a breach and they went under? So we need to understand that this is very, very important. Now, for us to understand the topic we are speaking to this morning, we need to understand where we are coming from. Thankfully for me, I have veterans on this platform this morning. I have Mrs. Zacchaeus, and then I have Mr. Oguniro. You will remember that 1995, 96, 98, when you want to have a board meeting, is something you must prepare for, because the reams of paper that we printed in the course of like 1 week that the committees and the board will meet can actually open a supermarket. You will see the secretary of the company secretary working overnight. When you get to the office in the morning, you see piles of paper on the floor, and they actually have a dedicated dispatch rider to be moving documents to directors over the night and all that. So it was quite strenuous. And then how do you now ensure that those papers you circulated still remain confidential? How do you ensure that people in the office are not looking at those information? And then you have the secretary of the company secretary becoming the most important or liked person in the institution, not because they like him, but because everybody wants to suck up to him to get information on what is happening. So there was maybe lack of attention to corporate governance, and then the ego of staff working around those places. So they thought they were more important than every other person. In fact, in those days when they say come to the boardroom, your leg will be shaking. They were seen as cult-like. Even the way that maybe they thought them, the way directors walk into the boardroom, you would think that something is happening there. You know, their faces are always pensive. They carry the board papers in the way that you say, what is happening there? You know, so it was like cult-like. And then you see fusion of offices. The MD is the chairman, and his junior brother is the executive director. All sorts of these things were visible. And then you had limited reporting requirements. Nobody just seemed to care about what was happening in the companies. So that's where we are coming from. And the result of that, it's you actually have rumors and half-truths all over the system, resentment, people looking at themselves and maybe telling you that they are demigods. You hear people saying, I will destroy you, you know, and what has caused that is because of the way the old guard handled the system. So you had ineffective regulatory oversight. So that is where we are coming from. And by the time it was getting like 2008, when we had the banking collapse in 2009, things just had to change. And then several codes started coming on. CBN had its own, and SEC had its own, and then the overarching one for the NCCG that just became effective last year. So these codes gave us copious provisions about corporate governance. Unfortunately, there was an assumption that companies will handle confidentiality on their own. So there were no rules, in quote, as to how confidentiality matters will be handled. So what that resulted in is that we are now driven by practice and not regulation. So issues like paperless boards, use of electronic tools, management of board, documentation, all these things are just catching on. But because of the cost, people didn't take it serious. Then the pandemic struck. So whether we liked it or not, we were compelled to start looking at issues of confidentiality and security. Like Dr. Ashraf mentioned when he was presenting, the information that is flowing on several electronic platforms now, they are quite alarming, such that if there is a breach, a company may just go down. So we are forced to look at alternative means of work. All the myths we had about work, everything disappeared. In 2020, when I was preparing for the annual general meeting, everybody was just pensing, how do you get CBN to connect virtually? How do you get SEC to connect virtually? How do you get the directors to connect virtually? So there was this fear and anxiety about how everything was going to work. But we did the AGM, we did several board meetings, not because we wanted to do it virtually, but because we didn't have a choice. And like Dr. Ashraf also mentioned, it's not going to go back to the way we were. Because if we look at the cost of holding a board meeting physically and the cost of holding a board meeting virtually, most managers that are cost conscious will prefer the virtual one. Because it's just better, just a lot better. Even the AGM, if you are a private company, under 20 minutes you are through without renting a hall, And so all these things mean that we have to now be particular about how we handle confidentiality. Even the Corporate Affairs Commission had to issue guidelines last year on how to handle, how to hold virtual meetings, even for PLCs. So, but while we have advantages for this, what this has done is to now open companies to a lot of cyber attacks, which has actually heightened stealing of corporate information. And these are very valid risks. Like I said earlier, if you just want to test what I'm saying, ask your IT department to go to the black web, type the name of your company and search the information going around about your company. You may be surprised that password of your company, officials, and even executives are for sale on the black web. That has happened before from experience. Now, so what do we do? So here I'm going to just be giving one or two ideas from my own experience and what I've had on how to secure information about your company. The first thing is to adopt effective board administration tools. These are electronic tools that will help you administer the board. So these platforms, these are where you can post your board papers, post company information in a very, very secure manner. They are not expensive, but they're not also unaffordable, so you can actually subscribe to any of these. What that does for you really is that you can control access. You have access rights to that platform. You can password it, and then you can control who can see the information. It also allows directors to comment, send back information, make requests on everything they require. And so it's like it's an electronic filing room for your board papers. So we may need to actually take advantage of any of that. Now, cyber education for board members is also very, very important. Some of our directors, I'm sorry to say, are still computer illiterate. They see it as demeaning for them to sit in front of a system to be typing all these things. So what they do is they call on their secretaries, their PAs to do these things for them. Some information are too confidential for even PAs to look at. And I'll give an example. A PA goes to a beer parlor and says, my director is a so of this PLC. In 2 weeks' time, they are going to the market. And that information is not out yet on SEC and all that. And everybody on that at that meeting that has shares in that place, they take positions. So what the secretary has done unwittingly is to give price sensitive information unknown to the director that the company secretary is working with. So we need to be very careful. So we need to give cyber education to our directors. They need to understand the impact and the import of the information being circulated to them. You can also buy devices for directors. These days of iPad, it's so easy. You can connect to the electronic tools and then they can work on the iPad themselves. And you can encrypt those devices. IT can put security features on them that even if they are stolen, then you'll be able to access the information on those devices. You can also create emails for your director. So rather than use Yahoo Mail or Gmail for information flow, they can now be on the network of the company. What that does for you is that you are able to monitor the traffic, you are able to monitor access on those emails right from your IT department. And one other thing that's most important if you do that is that when directors end their tenure, you're able to deactivate that email such that everything there becomes inaccessible. That is actually very, very important. Now, I recall that Mr. Dushola mentioned that a company secretary must earn trust. That is very important. So for a company is caveat company secretary, if you allowed me to use that, you must be careful about the company secretary you engage for your company. Must be mature, must be experienced, must be competent, must be confident. Now, it will be sad if your company secretary is cowed, and then if this speaker, the company secretary, begins to shake and is not able to even open his mouth. And I've seen that happen before. But you must get a company secretary that can say respectfully, sir, I hear what you're saying, but sir, it's not something that we should do. Just like Mr. Odushola said, qualification is one, being fit is also another. So you must get a company secretary that is fit, that is mature, that is experienced. Otherwise, you may not be able to control confidentiality. I can tell you from experience while working in a commercial bank that even if it's just walk into office and begin to sit down and say, hello, people that you know that above your station, why is this person trying to be familiar with me? Why is that person trying to see what I'm doing? They just want information on what happened at the board meeting. Because at times they ask to leave the board meeting and the company secretary is still there and they are deciding issues concerning the EDs. And then they come to us and say, please, I owe you one if you just tell me this. Are you going to say that? Or are you going to say, I'm sorry, sir, you will get that information shortly. I'm so understand my position, sir. Or when it comes to you, I just shaking, you say, it's not me, sir, I just recorded, sir. So you need to be able to stand your own as a company secretary. So it's important that you appoint company secretaries that are mature and experienced. And then collaboration with IT security. The company secretariat is no longer an island. If you want to ensure security of information, you must be friendly with the IT and IT security especially. You must be aware of trends so that you can bring that to the board and secure information. Information is the new oil, whether we like it or not. If people have access to your information, they have access to your life. So we need to be mindful of that. And then you need confidentiality obligations around people working in the company secretariat. Unfortunately, the company secretary cannot do everything alone. He has to rely on one or two people. Are those people aware of their obligations? Do they have NDAs signed? And I give an example. When I was in the commercial bank, a young officer, we had an ESCO meeting, and they were going to sack somebody very, very important, one of the general managers. At that time, I think I was a DM or just becoming manager, I can't recall now. And the meeting lasted until like 7:30. And after the meeting, as I was going out, the MD called me back and said, allow sir, if I hear this thing, if this thing leaks, I know it is you, and I'm going to deal with you. If I'm going to dismiss you on the spot. So, and I'm supposed to send an extract to the head of HR. So what I did was I waited behind, typed my extract, took it to the head of HR myself. I just ignored the secretary and entered and gave it to him to sign an appointment. And I told him that, sir, if this thing goes out, it is you and me, I'll be dismissed on the spot. Now he said, hi. I said, is that deep, sir? So what that did was that he took typed the letter himself, he didn't give it to any secretary. And then the officer, senior officer was supposed to be let go the following day. And when he was given the letter, I was in shock because he did not hear anything about it. Now we had to go to that length because people that were working on that needed to understand the confidentiality obligations around what they were asked to do. And then we need to pass that people working with us. Otherwise, you will be thinking you safeguarded the information of the board. Meanwhile, it's all over the company and everybody is laughing at you. So that is very, very important. Now, this particular slide, I just brought so that we are aware of what is happening around us now. Phishing attack is now become the #1 global cybersecurity threat. And what is this? It's just attackers trying to lure us to divulge sensitive information that ordinarily we would not have divulged. So, and these are the features. You need to always check the source of any email you receive. About 3-4 days ago, I received a mail ostensibly from GT Bank asking me for information. So when I clicked on the email, I just clicked on it. What I saw on that, it could be ajanlekoko.com that you will see. So somebody is trying to get information from you. So if you just over on that embedded link, just click on it or the email address, you will actually get the email of the person sending that thing to you. So it's covered, it's obscure so that you will fall into it. So any mail actually asking you to divulge your password, divulge your username, please be suspicious. And then any mail that has wrong spelling, grammatical errors, and then a sense of urgency. If you don't do it by end of tomorrow, we are going to debit you 100,000, all those things. So look out for all those things. And these are scammers at work. Now, The E part on this slide, the E on this slide is just to adopt the principle of PTA. Pause, think, and act. You don't have to respond to every email under 2 minutes. Brood over it and act. Your IT department, if you work in the company, should be sending such mails to just to check whether people are aware of all these things that are happening. It is very real and it is very, very potent at the moment. Okay, so one or two other initiatives that we can employ is to accept that humans are the weakest link in the security architecture. If somebody does not make a mistake, there's no breach. Every security breach has been because somebody has made a mistake, either not being careful, clicked on a malware in form of an email, or gone to a site and then brought some problem into the company. So we accept that humans are the weakest link in the security architecture. And once we assume that that is the truth, then we begin to mitigate what we need to do. So directors must understand the importance of confidentiality, and you must make them sign non-disclosure agreements. There should be a code of conduct. There should be something speaking to confidential conflict of interest. They also mentioned there are disclosure obligations. There will be a board charter that will be speaking to that. And what all this is supposed to do is to draw attention to the fact that the information at their disposal is confidential, it is important. By the time they are signing those documents, they'll be asking you questions about it, and then you'll be telling them why you are giving them those things to sign. The idea is to bring it to their consciousness, and then they become aware of it, especially as most of them are independent, maybe businessmen working outside your kind of environment, so that they are aware of the kind of risk that they're carrying or they can lure the company into. So in the final analysis, no matter your investment in IT security or confidentiality security or whatever that you put in place, understand that your greatest defense still remains your people. Your greatest defense is your people. So once you accept that, you anticipate it, and then you mitigate them. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dewey. Thank you so much for that very practical and enlightening session. So, I mean, confidentiality has always been the hallmark of what we do as company secretaries, but given current events and current realities, rather, it has become even more important and critical to the work that we do as company secretaries. Thank you so very much for sharing, and also touching on your own personal experiences, which we found quite useful. Very quickly now, moving on to the last session, and again, just to say that we'll have an opportunity very shortly, in another 15 minutes or so, to address some of the questions that have already arisen from your presentation. I can see questions in the chat box, in the Q&A chat box. Mr. Oguniron, Hakim Oguniron, who is going to be speaking with us, or sharing his experience on career progression from company secretary to board chair. And I must say that I found that that topic quite intriguing, and got a few calls as well from a few company secretaries asking if we were wanting to become board chairs or wanting to encourage company secretaries to become board chair, and saying how directors will begin to have an aversion to us company secretaries transiting. But we'll wait to hear what Mr. Oguniron has to share. Before I invite him to our virtual podium, I'd like to quickly introduce him. Mr. Hakim Oguniron is the founder, CEO of Exima Realty Company Limited and Home for Me Nigeria Limited. He's also the chairman of the board of directors of Lagos Building Investment Company PLC, and a non-executive director of a few other companies. You can see that he's very well suited to speak on this topic of progressing from company secretary to chair. He retired from UAC Nigeria PLC, having served as the managing director of UAC and Property Development Company from 2010 to 2018, and managing director of MDS Logistics, a division of UAC Nigeria PLC between 2000 and 2010. Prior to 2000, he was at various times a law lecturer, a company secretary / legal advisor, sales, marketing manager, and corporate planning manager. He was named one of the top 20 CEOs of the listed companies on the Nigerian Stock Exchange in 2013. Mr. Oguniran graduated in 1984 from the University of Lagos with a second-class honors upper division, and also passed the Nigerian bar examinations in 1985 with honors. He later obtained an LLM and MBA degrees from the University of Lagos. He's a former Fulbright visiting scholar at the Yale Law School in the United States and has attended several high-level management training programs. He's a recipient of several awards, including the Kwame Nkrumah Award for Corporate Governance Excellence in 2009, Distinguished Chartered Secretary of the Year 2010, Association of Professional Bodies in Nigeria's Award for Professional Excellence in 2011, among other awards. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Oguniran to our virtual podium. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me also join the other panelists to thank the DCSL for inviting us for this event. I have a few slides which I want to share. Don't know whether, can I confirm that you are seeing my slides now?
Yes, we can, sir.
Okay, all right. So I'm just going to. Okay, I mean, this is basically more about sharing my experience, but I just thought that it's also important that we put we set the proper context for the discussion and stick to 2 or 3 other slides that will help us to define the issues. And then I will share a few experiences, and then I will round up. So I'll set the context, because I think at the root of what I'm supposed to be speaking about is the distinction between functional and general management, is the transition from functional to general management. I think if you want to make the move, there are 2 key issues you should pay attention to. And then if you're moving from committee secretary to board chair, there are some imperatives which I think some of the panelists have also alluded to in the course of this discussion. I will just try to underscore some of those issues a bit more directly, and then I will share my thoughts and round up. You know, what I've basically done here is to try to compare functional and general management. What's very important as a company secretary legal advisor, you're a functional manager, you know, but if you have the plan to transit to general management, you must understand that there needs to be a total paradigm shift. You know, functional managers are specialists, and you're responsible for just a part of the organization. And I'm not by any means saying that as a company legal advisor, you're not a business manager, you don't understand the impact of what you do on the business. But the reality of the matter is that, like we say, your vision is a microscopic vision. Unlike the general manager who has a 360-degree vision, your responsibility is over your turf. You're a brilliant, technical, professional, you know your stuff, compliance, board management, you are a gatekeeper and things like that. Now, how those impact the business, you also must take into account, you know, but when you want to transit to general management, you have to begin to see things from a different perspective. For example, in terms of thinking, as a functional manager, your duty is to answer every question right. But when you become a general manager, your duty is to ask the right questions. And there's a whole of difference between them. In terms of managing, as a functional manager, you are macro, you manage macro, you are a doer, you're an executor. But as a general manager, you manage macro, you're a catalyzer, you deliver results through others. You're not a one-man riot squad, or a one-man riot squad with a few professionals just working around you. You have an helicopter view of the business, and you are responsible, you know, for the overall performance of the business. As a functional manager, you have a departmental and functional responsibility and authority. But as a general manager, it's totally different. You have end-to-end responsibility and accountability. And mostly as functional managers, particularly as company secretaries, you are regarded as a cost center. You have no P&L responsibility, But when you begin to transit to general management, you have to begin to see all those in a different light. And just to set the context. Now, I think there are two key issues if you want to make the move to general management. Number one is to understand the organizational position on cross-functional movement. And like I've tried to explain here, is it an open play or are there core professions in the organization? That is very important. If it's an open play, that means in all probability, the company has a formal scheme or a system in place to drive that process. And it is your responsibility as quickly as possible to ensure that you find yourself in that system. But there are some companies that they have core professions, for example, so you cannot transit to the top post position unless you belong to that core profession. So it will then be your responsibility, if that's your desire, to begin to understand how you need to make that movement. The other thing which I think is very critical also is your own career objectives. You need to have clarity of purpose. Well, what exactly is your career objective? I've seen company secretaries who left legal practice. They came into a corporate environment just to acquire the knowledge, to acquire some further experience, and then go back to teaching or to their legal practice and things like that. So for somebody like that, all you need to do is just ensure that you are the best company secretary whilst you are there. But if you desire to stay for the long haul, you have to ensure that your career objective aligns with the organizations and take necessary steps in that respect. Now, let me quickly mention a few things that I think are the imperatives. Number one, I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, we've read Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The first thing is that as a functional manager who desires to transit to general management, you have to begin with the end in mind. You have to set very clear and unambiguous targets for yourself. You must do a frank self-assessment and know where your weaknesses lie. When I joined the industry, I came from the academia, and I used to be very proud that I was a brilliant lawyer. Everybody used to tell me that, you know your law, you know these things. You can imagine, I was teaching at the University of Lagos, But the first major group meeting I attended, it was a budget session. And all the business heads, they presented their budgets, and then when they finished, the chairman said, okay, let's do a sensitivity analysis. And of course, I've never heard what sensitivity analysis was before, So I quickly was asking the group internal, which one is this one? Then that one complicated the matter further. He said, you need to sensitize the budget. What was sensitizing the budget? It was clear to me that there was a major gap in my previous learning. And that was why I went to quickly enroll for ICSAN, and I also started an MBA. So I was running both MBA and ICSAN together at the same time, just to gain the necessary financial knowledge which I needed, which I knew I needed. You must define your personal growth strategies. I remember as a young manager, they used to tell me that I was very restless, because every 2 or 3 years, I walked up to my superiors and I asked, what next? I always tell people that if you are in an organization 3, 4, 5 years, nothing happens to you. You are just on the same spot. It's either you are not right for the organization or the organization is not right for you. You must develop the right mindset. There has to be a total paradigm shift. If you want to make that transition, you have to begin to see yourself more as a business manager. You have to begin to acquire skills and capabilities that you need to deliver in that financial management, leadership, business. You must understand, you must have business knowledge. If you're in a manufacturing company, for example, you must take time to understand the production process. If you're in a supply chain business, you must understand the linkages. You must understand the value chain of the organization. You must know what you need to do in that respect. You must pay attention to macro issues. One of the areas that many of us as company secretary, legal advisors, that we often fall flat is that we pay so much attention to our law, our compliance, and our everything. But as we all have had today, the world has gone far beyond that. You must seek cross-functional experience, shop floor deployment. You must be ready to get your hands dirty. Nobody's going to throw this thing on your lap. The opportunities must be there. But if you do have the opportunity to get your hands dirty. If you really want to aspire to the top, you must grab it. I mean, when I joined USC, you know, all I wanted to become was company legal advisor. In those days, you know, that was a major aspiration, you know. And when I joined, I remember that when I joined as the head of legal, you know, and I had a company chief who was the company secretary, you know, he walked up to my office and he tried to sound me out whether I was interested in a cross-functional assignment. And I said, no, I'm happy being a lawyer. I just want to dish out my legal advice, relate with the MDs and things like that, you know. But in 1996, you know, I was sent on a training, Unilever, then I was still part of Unilever. I attended Unilever IMS, International Management Seminar, which was a program that was reserved for like the top 2% of the organization. You know, there were 66 of us in that program from about 40 countries. There were 20 lawyers on that program. I was the only lawyer in a legal function. The others were in brand management, they were in sales, they were this, you know. And that made me to become very intrigued. So I engaged a guy from Brazil. He was a brand manager, a lawyer, and he was asking me, what are you doing? What are you doing in law? That your legal profession is like, the legal function is boring, you're not going to have access to opportunities that you need, you know. As, of course, when I came back, my perspective changed. And when I had the opportunity to move across into sales, I grabbed it with my two hands, you know. You must build bridges across the organization. Visibility is key. You know, when you attend events, conferences, retreats of the organization, you must put yourself out. You must take active part in everything that happens in the organization. You must, when they put you in syndicate groups, you must prepare for the syndicates. You must make relevant contribution. If they're looking for those who make syndicate presentation, please seize the opportunity. Put yourself out. Because what are you doing? You are putting yourself in a position to be considered in case those opportunities arise in the future. You know, I made my journey from the classroom to the board, and I just want to share, just to round up, just to mention a few things that I think we need to pay particular attention to. Number one, I think we must understand that it is legitimate to aspire to the top. It is very, very legitimate to aspire to the top. And nobody is going to begrudge you for aspiring to the top, you know, but you just have to prepare for it. And many of us have read the story of Jack Welch. You know, when Jack Welch joined GE as a trainee, you know, and the first form he filled, you know, what's your aspiration? He said, I want to become the CEO of this group. Of course, if you read the story very well, the first year he resigned in anger before he was called back. You know, he did become the CEO, of course he did, and went on to become the greatest manager of this century. You know, so it is legitimate to aspire. But the transition to general management doesn't just happen. It will not fall on your laps. You must understand that you have to work towards it actively. You have to actively work towards it. You must recognize your weakness, and you must strengthen your position. I mean, the other two panelists, they've spoken so eloquently about the community, you know, because as a community secretary, you are in a vantage position. You are relating with the DMUs in the organization. You interact with the directors, you know. So the first thing is that you have to be the best professional that you can ever be. You know, you must not, I mean, one of the stories that came to my knowledge that I said I would share was when I was head of legal for USC, we had a director on our board who was the chairman of another company, you know, and one day he came for board meeting in the USC house, and apparently he had spoken to my chairman. They had their board meeting a few days before, and there was an issue that they discussed that was a major problem on their board, and apparently the company secretary of that company, you know, couldn't help him. Oh, so my chairman, I believe, must have told him, no, don't worry, let me call our manager, and I'm sure he will have a solution for you. You know, so they called me to the chairman's office, and the man explained the problem, you know, and as luck will have it, I knew the new law that was that had just been passed, and that's one of the things that we have to do as community legal advisors. As any new regulation, it's your responsibility to grab it, review it, and pass it on. I made a habit. Whenever there was a new law, collect it immediately, or a regulation, or now that there is a new CAMA regulations, you know, and I'm asking all the participants in this on this forum, how many of us have reviewed the new company regulations on our own, and we have circulated to all the business managers in our business, you know. To cut long story short, I explained the law to this director of ours, who was the chairman of another company, and I was so impressed that we had board meeting a few days ago, you know. To cut long story short, you know, I became his default advisor, even though he had a company secretary. It was so bad that when they wanted to have their meeting in Abuja at Hilton, you know, he will ask them to take a room for me. You know, they will lodge me, you know, for like 2 or 3 days. I probably will have nothing to do, just in case it was necessary for him to speak to me on any issue. You know, so as company secretary, you're occupying that position, you must understand that you have to be the best at your game. And then you're already building the trajectory for the future. I've said here that you must set your growth milestone, and you must have your backup plans. You must do regular appraisal. I've seen people who have just sat down in the organization for 5, 6, 8 years. You know, they're not promoted, no cross-functional movement, no nothing. You know, it's either that organization is not right for you, or you are not right for the organization. I cannot overemphasize the fact that you must embody the organizational core values. You know, if you aspire to the top, you must embody the core values of your organization. You cannot be found wanting in any of those. You must know. I mean, if there are many of us now who don't even know our vision and mission statement, you know, if you have any opportunity for any director or any senior manager, whoever come in contact with you and sound you out, you just have to ensure that you know what you're doing. You must set high standards of performance. If you want to aspire to the top, please don't be a threshold performer. You know, everything you do must be driven by passion. You know, Jack Welch says passion is deep and authentic excitement about work. You know, when senior managers, when they come into contact with you, when they have the opportunity of relating with you, they must see you as somebody who does the work with zest, with passion, with executional excellence. You know, somebody who will just always deliver. You know, so at the end of the day, it's about creating that visibility for yourself, is about taking necessary steps to empower yourself. It's about preparation, you know, for the position. You know, it's a lot of us that we're aspiring to that position, you know, and we still run away from accounts, from financial management, you know. Always, and it's not about the solicitor's account that you did in the law school. You have to take steps. You must understand, I mean, for me, when I was growing up as a manager, you know, I took my time to be able to understand and interpret financial statements. And I will not compete with the accountants. But when I see P&L, I know what I'm looking for. When I see balance sheet, I know what I'm looking for. You know, and it really helped me, because when you're in that meeting, when I needed to take any decision, I know what to ask for. I remember that my finance director in UPDC, one of my finance directors, what we used to call me an accountant, you know, because before every meeting, I will have taken my time to ensure that I understand the financial performance. I am asking the right questions, you know, and then I'm doing what I need to do. And remember, the journey is a marathon. You know, I'm rounding up now. It's not a 100-meter dash. You know, it's about building excellence. It's about total quality management. You know, you must get it right one time and every time. There's no margin of error in this matter. You know, and okay, if you're in a company where your father is the owner, CEO, you know, they can just appoint you as a board. That's what I'm talking about. But we are in an organization that you have to walk the way through by performance and what you need to do. You just have to do what you need to do. You know, and finally, you know, people talk about luck. You know, that's always the place of someone's sin hand. You know, so people say that you have to be lucky. You know, I already spoke about preparation, you know, and we say that preparation is, that luck is when opportunity meets preparation, you know. I don't call it luck, maybe because of my faith, you know. call it a favor of God. You know, in my faith, and I'm sorry to say that's my faith, you know, the Bible says, Paul may plant, Apollo may water. It is the Lord that will give the increase. You know, you also have to defer to that, to the almightiness of God to also help you. So you do what you need to do, you know, and then ask God to help you. But you cannot ask God to help you if you have not done what you need to do, you know. So I think the transition can happen. We've seen several examples in this country. I can't begin to recount. You know, there are many top CEOs today, many great entrepreneurs today, you know, who made the transition from being a functional manager to general manager, you know, from being a company secretary to board chair, to being CEO, to being executive directors, to being general managers. You know, we have great examples that we can learn from. And I do think that it can happen, but it will not fall on your laps. You have to make the effort, you have to build the platform, you have to execute your strategy, you have to be focused, you have to be diligent, and you have to deliver as the organization wants. And hopefully, you know, many more of us will get to that position by God's grace. Thank you very much. I think I need to stop at this stage.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Ogunra. That was simply brilliant. I was totally blown away by how simply you explained all of the preparations that we need to, you know, make to position ourselves, to make ourselves visible if we want to transition. And for me, the very important takeaway was the fact that you said it's a deliberate decision. So you cannot just let yourself move with the trend or move with the flow within an organization. You have to know, clearly map out your own career path and decide that this is what I want to do. I want to transition from being a company secretary to becoming either an ED or a NED or whatever it is, but it's important that we ourselves as individuals take that decision before we then begin to work towards actualizing it. Thank you very much, sir. I'm quite humbled and totally blown away by the wealth of experience that has been shared across the virtual table this morning, starting with Dr. Ashraf's keynote speech, to our chairman's welcoming address, and then to all the sessions that we have heard today. I will now hand over to our able chair as she moderates the Q&A session. Over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Anne. Yes, I have been extremely impressed and I have thoroughly enjoyed all the presentations as well. And it's been a great learning point. I think we have run well over schedule. So I don't know how much time we have in terms of for the Q&A, but I will, if you just give me an indication through the chat, but at least I'll try and go on. I hope people will be able to stay on for at least another 15 to 20 minutes. So the first question I'm going to take is addressed to Mr. Rotimi Odushola. And it's a question that is very dear to me, because I was going to ask him that, but fortunately somebody else has. You know, when you spoke about considerations for board appointments, you mentioned that, you know, that there was a demographics, that age was a consideration, and obviously geographical spread. But you did not specifically mention gender, which I believe is key. So anyway, one of the participants has asked the question, how can company secretary balance the demographic representation of the board if the board members are biased about the contribution of women and think they are not very important to the success of a business? I would be amazed if any board could still feel that after all the, you know, the practical things we have seen. But Mr. Odushola, would you like to answer that question, please? How can you balance the demographic representation if you are on a board where the contribution of women is not considered as very important?
Okay, I've read the question myself. Thank you, Mrs. Zakios. I think it is not factually correct to say, to make the assertion that not, you know, the women on the board do not contribute to improvement in the performance of the board. Actually, there are research to the contrary that suggests that, look, having, you know, the right diversity and especially having women on the board is positively impactful on the performance of organizations. And to deal with such a situation, I think, you know, depending on who you are responding to, you might want to refer to such research and point to, you know, and we have them even here in Nigeria. If you look at the boards of, you know, some of the best performing banks, allow me not to mention names, you will find that, you know, even in the position of chairman, you have some really reputable, strong, and really impactful women leading these boards. And therefore, I don't think it is correct. And I would say, answering that question, you could point the person making the assertion into the direction of research, but you could also say, hey, look, there's practical examples that abound of how impactful the contribution of women is on boards of companies. Positively impactful.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Chala. I am in total and firm agreement with you, and I hope that has helped the person who asked the question. To Dr. Ashraf, the question from one of the participants is, what will be the governance where in the course of a virtual meeting, the director is cut off due to technological challenges? Do we record that in the minutes, even though she was present at the beginning of the meeting? How do we ensure that technology does not hinder effective deliberations and engagement by the board, which happens during face-to-face meetings? So, Dr. Ashraf?
Well, actually, as a general procedure, actually what happens is we take the quorum at the beginning of the meeting. So for example, we start the board meeting and we say now we have a quorum for the board. And those people are president of the board itself. So if during the course of the meeting somebody is disconnected, that's actually not counted as he or she left the meeting. No, we don't even mention that in our minutes. So that's really not important. So even if he or she cannot even connect again, we don't even mention that in the minute. We have the quorum at the beginning and then we continue to the end. Now, as for the idea of how to make sure that technology actually is really sort of reliable in that respect, there is no way we can do that. I mean, we can always have alternative ways of doing it. For example, we can ask board members to say, okay, we connect through virtual, but then also have your telephone ready. So if a connection is bad, then you have the telephone you can actually participate by. A telephone we can put you in a conference call, for example. So we should try to think about alternatives, which it might be more difficult if somebody is traveling overseas, but again, it doesn't mean that the quorum is lost or the person is not there. No, he or she, they are in the meeting, even if they got disconnected during the meeting itself.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Adewi, I'm going to ask you to please answer this question. A challenge of a good company secretary is the culture of the board and the company. Culture is a huge elephant and not nimble. How can one be an effective governance practitioner in a dated culture, especially in this new normal, in the shortest possible time?
Madam Chairman, that's a very interesting question, really.
I thought so.
Because that's why during my presentation, I actually part of it referred to appointing your values. So at the point of even appointing director, you should be clear about the people you want on your board, the people that should share your values. And then being a dinosaur is clearly getting out of fashion these days. Nobody wants those kinds of people on the board. But it has to be continued education and engagement. The transition from the way it used to be and the way it's supposed to be is not as easy as we think it should be. All of us need to, as much as possible, be ready to learn new things, be ready to engage new things. Now, the pandemic it was sudden, it wasn't planned. It was something we didn't prepare for. So all of us just got caught up in things that we didn't know could ever happen. And so, like I said, it's a very difficult question. It's just to continue the engagement, continue to speak to them, continue to show them advantages, and continue to push. If you have a professional board, it's easier because then they're there not to serve their own interests. They're there for the good of the company. But if you have a political board, I would say God will help you because then when people have entrenched interests, it's kind of difficult to change the mindset because they are looking at the interest and not for the good of the company. So whatever you even say is going to be considered from where your perception about the political party in quotes that you are on the board. So the merits of what you are saying will be lost. But it's continued engagement, it's speaking to people, it's showing them the better way to do it. This culture will ruin us, this culture can help us. And you can even bring professionals that will speak to the board, bring case studies. And then in those case studies, we can't say that people will see what they're doing, how it has affected other companies and what they need to do right. But it is on continued engagement, but it's a difficult position to be when you have people that just have a mindset about how things should run and are not even interested in changing.
But I would just add, I would just ask you a follow-up question on that, which is my question. In that kind of situation where you're faced with that kind of culture, where you can see it's detrimental to the company and maybe even against the law, what would your advice be to a company secretary? Your honest advice to somebody who is in that position?
Now, if it's against the law, it's another level, because when the issue of KYC, for example, started in banks, one of the provisions there is that if anything happens, they are going to first arrest the company secretary and the managing director. I was the company secretary at that time, and I made it my point of duty to bring that provision to the consciousness of every business manager. And at the end of every month or every quarter, I will go and check what they've done, KYC, the outstanding issues and all that. And I will make a lot of noise, even at the board level, because it affected me personally. Once I enter a jail as a lawyer, I'm done. My career has ended. So that won't hit me. But like Mr. Mr. Rotimi said earlier, you must earn the trust of your board. And how do you earn that trust? You must have been seen to be objective, to be competent, and not to be partisan in any way, because a lot of company secretaries make the mistake of thinking that they are directors. And so they side with some directors in some instances, and then they are seen to be in groups. Once you do that, you lose the trust of your board. So if you are seen as trustworthy, if you are seen as objective, if you are seen as competent, then you are in a good position to begin to drive those things to the board. And when you get the trust of your chairman, especially, and begin to drive those things to the chairman, you get it done. And well, there's always a point of separation. If you keep pushing and you keep saying that those things are not going to be done, and then your petition will be solved, maybe the best part for you is just to take a step and just leave that company. It's always an answer to this kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult decision, but in the end, it may be the one that may be the safest course for a practitioner. Okay, Mr. Oguniro, I'd like you to please answer this question. It says, please help me clarify this. Between the managing director and the non-executive director, who is supposed to execute power to control the daily affairs of an organization? Because there's a big question in a one-man business setting. Mr. Oguniro, from your wealth of experience, how do you think a company secretary in a small business?
I mean, number one, the secretary is the secretary of the board. The company secretary is not the secretary of the managing director. It's not the secretary of the chairman. It's not the secretary of the executive directors. In fact, I used to say that I used to hear people say this person is the chairman of the company. That's a misnomer. The chairman is the chairman of the board. So technically, a company has no chairman. Is the chairman of the board. Now, because the secretary is the secretary of the board, you have to ensure that you are accountable as much as possible, to the board. You should not be seen to be, but in practice, I understand it can be very difficult because usually maybe it's the MD that will do your appraisal, it's the MD that is responsible for a lot of things that you are entitled to, but you must play your role as a professional. And when, like Mr. Lausa said, when conflicts arise, you must take a position of objectivity. And you must ensure that everything you do according to the rules. As long as you do that, it may not be easy. You may suffer some prejudice. You may suffer some problems for some time. But ultimately, if you don't leave the organization, you're going to triumph. So I think the important thing for us to note as company secretaries is that you have to take a professional position. And we've had instances, a whole lot of instances in the past. That we've had boards that had wanted to either kowtow us or to cajole us into doing. You have to take your position in accordance with the law, in accordance with the codes, no matter how difficult it is. Let it be on the record that you stood up as the company secretary and you advised the board that this is the right thing to do. And when there's conflict, try and take an objective position, and then hopefully, you'll be able to get by. Yes.
This is why, thank you very much, sir. This is why it's important what all of you have alluded to, that the quality of the person who is made a company secretary is really as important as the people who are on the board, because you really must have somebody who is mature, who is experienced, who is confident, because if they're not, then they will be, stamped all over by an aggressive aggressive board. Thank you very much for that answer. And I think following up from this is another question. And I think I'll ask Mr. Ojoshola to take this. In light of the increased participation of the board in the activities of management, is there a limit to what the company secretary reports to the board in order to maintain the thin line between executive and board duties? Mr. Ojoshola, would you like to take a stab at that?
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am. I think I'll, approach it from where Mr. Ogoniran addressed it from, namely your responsibilities are to the board, and therefore you maintain a respectable level of independence or non-partisanship in order to guide you in determining what is material to report to the board and what is not material. Indeed, I mean, I'm struggling to see what it is that a company secretary will keep away from the board. But honestly, if you are guided by the principle that you are responsible to the board and not to individuals on the board, whether they're the chairman or the MD or they're doing your appraisal or not, then it's an easier problem to address. But it does call for you to be confident in yourself, to be a professional, someone who would be able to stand by what he or she does. You have the knowledge of the law and you have the confidence and you've earned the trust that allows people to see that even where they don't agree with you, they know that you are coming from a position of non-partisanship, and therefore it helps to address the challenge.
Thank you. Dr. Eldin, I'd like you to please take the next question from one of the panelists. Can the company secretary actually influence the choice of the board in director recruitment? Are there instances where that is possible? That the company secretary may, actually influence the choice of the board? And is that even appropriate?
Well, again, the process goes, as you all know, through the nomination committee, of course. So what happens is when the nomination committee is trying to search for candidates, then that's when the company secretary can, nominate and suggest some names based on his or her knowledge of certain experiences missing on the board, certain backgrounds missing on the board, or gender missing on the board, and so on. So he or she can suggest some names. And maybe in the final call for discussions, and maybe if he or she is even present in the discussion of the final call between different sort of potential board members, he or she can highlight the fact that we are missing this sort of experience, or he or she can add that. But this is really the maximum they can do. Now, whether this is ethical or not, I don't see anything violating ethics in that respect. I just wanted to say something that in dealing with lots of boards in the MENA region, I have to tell you that the best boards we have interacted with, even in banks and big companies, are those who have strong company secretaries. And in some of the boards, I could see in the room, the best person in that room is actually the company secretary in this bank. And these are big banks, by the way. So the quality of that person affects the decision making. So I can't see any reason why he or she cannot recommend some people and cannot just give some sort of ideas of what do we missing here on the board. Not to select a specific person, but to say we need somebody who understands, for example, law, or somebody who understands strategy or governance. So this is the maximum they can do in this case, of course.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Okay, Mr. Ade, can I just add to what Dr. Ashraf just said?
Yes, please.
Yes, because I have had some personal experience with regards to this. We cannot overemphasize the fact that the company secretary must earn the trust of, especially the chairman of the board. And that you can do based on your objectivity, your competence, and then your maturity. I've had instances where the chairman will call me a day to the board meeting and will run through everything with me and ask pointedly, what is your opinion on this? And then you see instances where you get to the board meeting and your opinion is what the chairman is driving at the board meeting. That happens because you have developed the trust and confidence. He knows that you are not partisan. He knows that you don't have an interest other than the company just being run properly. And then once you are able to do that, and then you are able to influence whatever is happening on your board indirectly. If the company secretary is not influential, does not have stature, does not have the confidence of that board chairman, the board will flounder. And because they come once in 3 months or once in 2 months, but you are the one that is there. You may even work with like 2 or 3 MDs. So you even know the company more than the MD at that point in time. And you know the reasons why some things were decided that the MD does not even know. And so if you cannot speak up, if you cannot direct the board, then I wonder what you are doing there as company secretary.
Exactly.
If I can just add,
Thank you very much.
Can I just also add from a personal experience?
Yes.
I've seen an instance where the board actually asked the company secretary that we're trying to appoint 2 non-executive directors of this. This is the pedigree that we want. These are the qualifications that we want. And then can you scan around? And the company secretary actually took the information to the body of company secretaries that, please, my company, we're looking for non-ADs of this particular qualification and da. And it was one of them that actually contacted me that this particular company are looking for company secretary. This is the background they are looking for. I think, and of course, the rest was history. So just like we've all alluded to here, the position that you have earned for yourself as a company secretary matters, because if you're not somebody that is respected by either the chairman or the board, they'd rather just go to a consultant or to somebody else to do that for them, So but I think it does happen in practice. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your contribution. Mr. Adewi, the next question is for you. We've spoken extensively about the issue of cybercrime and, with us all having to rely so heavily on technology, the possibility of a breach of confidentiality. But somebody would like to know, in the event of a breach of confidentiality by a board member that comes to the attention of the company secretary, what should he do?
Another delicate question, madam. It's
people want to know.
But the relationship between the board and the company secretary is a delicate one. Well, I don't want to say master servant, but in our sphere right now, directors are seen as second only to God. And it goes back to the competence of the company secretary, the maturity and the stature of the company secretary. So the first thing that should happen is that you need to engage that director. And you need to let that director know what has happened, and then how you can quickly remediate that. Now, it's not your call to decide what happens to that director. It's the call of the board. And after speaking, because you must speak to the director first before it becomes an item before the board meeting. So you must first speak to the director and remediate what has happened. But you owe a duty to the board, especially the chairman, to let the chairman know what has happened, because you do not know what the repercussion of that breach will be. So it should not be said that in 2 or 3 months after it has happened, somebody says, even the company secretary was aware of it.
Exactly.
You have breached your duty. So sensitivities presume that you must handle it delicately, let the director know, try and remediate what has happened, and make sure it doesn't happen again. But you have to escalate to the chairman. So this has happened. We don't know what the extent will be. We have remediated it so that it can be a learning point to the board. Now, for some boards, they will mention, if they are professional, they will mention the name of the director at the meeting. For some political boards, they mention it generally so that everybody will learn. So you have to understand the dynamics of your board. You have to understand the sensibilities around your board, because if you just come as a professional and say, well, we had a breach last week and it was Mr. So-and-so, you may discover that everything becomes difficult for you on that board from that moment, and you won't know why. So you have to handle it sensibly and in a delicate manner. But the important thing is that you must remediate it and you must escalate it so that everybody should know what has happened.
Thank you. You always answer the delicate questions very easily. Thank you so much. Mr. Odushola, we have another question for you. In view of the caliber and quality in most cases of a proposed NED, how feasible is the concept of interviewing or requesting a nominee to meet with the board? Is it not a case of the board courting the NED as opposed to an ED who is an employee? So will informal off-meeting sessions with the board and nomination committees suffice?
Yes, I have some experience in this regard, and therefore I can speak to it. It works both ways. first and foremost, once you've defined the caliber of people you want as your non-executive directors, including independent non-executive directors, then you are looking for people who fit that, description. Therefore, you're not looking for people who will jump at the offer of being on your board merely because, oh yes, I've been invited. My experience has been that we've engaged potential candidates, two of whom we eventually did appoint, and they were just as curious as we were to say, I want to know about, yes, we know about your organization publicly, but I want to know what's going on. I want to know the dynamics of the board. I want to know why is there a vacancy. I want to know. So it is a mutually respectful process, in my opinion. And it is not a case of you're doing like you want to offer someone a job. At the same time, do not expect that any director, independent, that is what it's sought, will jump at an offer of being on your board. In fact, that should send you some, some negative signals if, a potential candidate is all too happy just because you have, approached him or her. The candidate must also, if it fits the criteria you are looking for, must also be, curious enough to want to know certain things. And therefore, engagement, my own experience is the nominations committee will meet with this director, have a conversation where, there is a clear understanding of why we're inviting you to come and join our board and what you can bring onto the board before, a decision is made to make a recommendation to the board for an appointment.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Eldin, let me just put one last question to you. A participant is asking, from the current financial, administrative, and operational volatilities, as well as the changing legal risks that you have pointed out, in what ways are compliance responsibilities changing for company secretaries? We've said that there's so many things are volatile, so many things are evolving. So how do you think these compliance responsibilities are changing for company secretaries?
Well, I think, the key challenge is not really in the compliance part. The key challenge is on making sure that we are, in fact, covering all these points. So the key idea is, what is the board discussing and what are the items on the agenda of the board? Now, what we have seen previously is, in many cases, agendas of the board meetings dominated by management sort of opinion and input and stuff like that. And that's where the company secretary, in this time, they have to make sure that we are discussing the right things. We are discussing what the law says that we have to be discussing. And then we have to be reporting on that properly. So I know in the case in our region, for example, we always have the compliance function separate. But again, we always say the company secretary has a key role to play to make sure that the board itself is in compliance with what they have to be doing and so on. So, for example, now we have new systems for conducting meetings, allowing virtual meetings, and for dismissal of information and disclosure. And the company secretary is the one who should make sure that the board actually is doing this. So he or she must have that role. And that's why I agree actually with what was mentioned before, that the quality of the company secretary now is much more important than ever. It was always important, but now it's even getting more and more important. Now, again, in our region, the problem that we have is most of the board members are board members in so many places, and they have key positions in so many places. They really have no time to think about lots of these things. The one who is really thinking about it all the time is the company secretary. And that's why he or she is driving the show to make sure that we are in compliance and we are on the right track of the board.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So these will be our last questions. I'm going to ask Mr. Ogunero. Now, I'm told that there are some company secretaries on the call who are not, maybe as senior or as mature or as experienced as you have described is necessary to be a successful one. So I'd just like you to just offer a word of advice. What advice would you give to the younger company secretaries who maybe because their companies are not that large or, for some reason they have been appointed? How can they build themselves to actually really be in this position where they can take charge and be trusted and, have all the qualities that they need to discharge their responsibilities? Mr. Ogunero, just a word or two of advice to the younger company secretaries in the House.
Okay, thank you very much. But just before I answer that question, I'd like to just underscore the point that Dr. Ashraf made about risk management and the role of company secretary. You know, what the pandemic has taught us is that risk management, that anybody who pays lip service to risk management does so at his or her own peril. Hitherto, we've counseled that every organization must have a risk template, and you must clearly identify your risk, identify the mitigants, and know what you need to do. But the pandemic came and basically threw everybody off guard. So it shows all of us that both from the angle of the board and the company secretary, you know, the question of risk management is a front burner issue for all of us at this stage. As for the younger company secretaries, you know, I think the real issue is that you must understand exactly what you want. That's why I spoke about clarity. You know, if you know that you want to aspire to the top, you have to prepare yourself for that aspiration. You know, it's not just, don't let it remain a wish. Don't let it remain a dream. You know, so if I come secretary, you're a lawyer. You're just a lawyer today. You must understand that you need to start acquiring the necessary knowledge that you will need in the near future. Financial knowledge, so you can do ICSA. ICSA exposes you to corporate finance, to management accounting, to financial accounting. You do an MBA. If you are in an organization that has core professions, you must know that you have to take steps to get certification in those professions. If you're in a bank, for example, you have to become either a chartered accountant or do a CFE. If you're in an accounting firm, you know, you are aspiring to become the country manager, you have to do more than just your LLBBL. And you will see all the guys who have done it today. You know, so it's about having clarity of what you want, understanding what it takes to get to where you want to get to, and then prepare yourself such that when the opportunity arises, you grab it, and there will be no stories. So I think it's a very wide field. If it doesn't happen in your current business, it will happen elsewhere. But you just have to prepare and get yourself ready for that big move, which I believe most of them are aspiring to. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Words of wisdom from a guru in the profession. Mr. Adeoye, just a word of advice for the upcoming company secretaries, please, Mr. Adeoye. I know Mr. Ogunora has spoken extensively, but do you have any other angle you'd like to take?
Yes, I would just say that company secretaries or aspiring company secretaries should be mindful of their trajectory. My first foray into company secretary function came when I was in chambers. One of my seniors left, and so my principal partner just entered and said, "Oh, you follow me to this meeting." We had the nominee arm, and all my seniors were just became very busy on their table, you know. And so I was the only one naive enough to say, "What does it entail?" I said, "Follow me, you will find out." And that was how I became secretary of an insurance company, maybe 1996 or so. And I'm a company secretary today. So what that led me to, I saw directors, how they interacted, minute taking, trying to get better at it. So in the point of trying to do the best at what I was doing, more jobs kept coming, opportunities kept opening up, and before you know it, you're already where you want to be. So it's just being mindful, don't take anything for granted. Whatever is given to you, do it excellently, like Mr. Ogunino said, and people will notice, and then they begin to reward you for it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Odushola, one last word of advice before I round up.
Thank you. In addition to all that's been said, I'll counsel company secretaries, especially young ones, improve yourself, seek knowledge, and gain knowledge. I mean, we've spoken about it's important to be the first person to review every new regulation, every new legislation. In fact, let the board see you as a source of updates on what is relevant to them. So when something comes out that is relevant, that has implications for the company or for directors, even for directors in their individual capacity, you do a very brief summary of it, you point it out to them. It is important. That's part of how you earn the trust. You have to maintain your professionalism and your non-partisanship. You're not always going to find yourself in a position where everyone is happy with you. But once they know that you are professional, you are not partisan, they may disagree, but they will not hold it against you. And honestly, will count when it's time for you to progress in your profession, in your career. They would remember that, oh, when there was a difficult subject, this gentleman or this lady professionally advised the board and stood her ground. And most of all, be the champion of corporate governance.
Fantastic. I have just been I have thoroughly
can I just
enjoyed
add
this
one
session.
word?
Oh, yes, please.
This is very important advice for future company secretaries. You need to have not only the knowledge, but the right attitude as well. Because you play diplomacy, you have to have the right character, attitude, and how to deal with people. This is a key attribute of a successful company secretary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that intervention. So I really want to thank DCSL for such an excellent roundtable. I mean, the quality, I said at the beginning of my, my opening remarks that I could tell from the quality of the panelists and the keynote speaker that we could be in for a time of great learning. And that is what exactly has happened. So in just summarizing, I think the things that have jumped out at me, even as I sit here as a former company secretary and now as a director and chairman on other boards, is that corporate governance is absolutely key, that the role is even so much more important now because of all the things that we have gone through in the past 9 years, and that, the company secretary must help the board to drive that strategy, and the role will continue to evolve. Company secretaries must be very responsive to global and local national issues. You must understand best practices all around the world, and you must be proactive. You need to anticipate change and advise your board. You need to embrace technology. I mean, there's absolutely no way we can escape that. Many people have said that, and the virtual life is here to stay. Even when things get back to normal, we will have hybrid events and hybrid meetings, because of course it is so much more convenient for people who are all over the world to meet virtually. You need to embrace technology. You need to make sure you understand it, the people you're working with understand it, and you have a technological team that will work perfectly for you. Board training and capacity building, absolutely essential. You have to empower your board to meet the challenges of the time. You need to make sure you're the one that drives them, make sure they get the trainings they need, whether professional, however it is. Cybercrime, you must be aware of the great dangers that our new virtual world will bring in terms of cybercrime and in terms of breach of confidentiality, and you must make sure that you're there to mitigate all the risks. Communication, we are now company secretaries, you have to be strategic communicators. You need to be able to make sure that the information flow is available and accurate, as one of the panelists said. You must stay connected, and you must find new ways to connect with your clients. I mean, you find that now, months and weeks, you don't even see your directors. How are you connecting with them? You must be really innovative about just staying in touch. Communication is key. All the panelists have said it, you have to train yourself. Capacity, capacity, capacity. And you only get it by hard work, dedication, and commitment. It's not going to be thrown on your lap. You need to show yourself as a professional. You need to show yourself as somebody who is excellent, attention to details in everything. So it's hard work, but see the results in the people who you have spoken to today. The importance of the role in succession planning. I mean, Mr. Dushola spoke critically about that, and that's very important. You must get yourself involved. You must be the go-to person. Be the person that your board, your chairman, and your board will go to first before they go to any external lawyers or consultants. Very important. Sorry to say that, DCSL, I know you're a consultant, but the company secretaries really have to step up their game. Very important. And then the interface. You have the interface between the board committees, between management and the board. So take that role very seriously. The role of assessment and evaluation of the board is also critical. And then I round up with Mr. Oguniro's description of who you need to be. How can you go from company secretary to a chair? You have to be an outstanding performer. You must be a trusted confidant. You must be excellent and well-informed professional. You must be passionate and committed. If there's no passion there and you're just doing it for a job, it will show. You must be passionate, and then you must position yourself. Visibility is everything. Accept to do things that are outside your realm of work. Accept to speak at places. Be seen. Be known as an industry leader. And the more you do that, he said it, it's a marathon. It's not a 100-meter dash. Slowly by slowly, precept by precept, you build up on your reputation, you build up on your character, and the sky is your limit. Again, I want to thank the keynote speaker and the panelists for a most excellent time today. I have really, really enjoyed it. And who knows, maybe I'll come back to the law one day. That's the beauty of our profession. There's always time for a retiree. Thank you so much, Bisi and Anne. So I hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Zakio Sanjay. Yes, we will warmly welcome you back to the fold. We are looking forward to that day. I don't know what to say. I don't know where to start. It's been a very interesting morning, even for me. And I'm sure for all our participants, I just didn't want this session to end. When we were conceiving this, we had the dilemma. We've always had it as a physical event. We thought, it's going to be virtual for the first time. Would we have the same impact? Would we get the same interaction? But I must say the conversation this morning has been mind-blowing. I have learned a lot, and trust me, I've been a company secretary for years, but this really has been really, really wonderful. So I hope, like me, you've taken a lot of learning. So without much ado, I'll first of all like to thank most profusely our chairman of this morning, Mrs. Zacchaeus. Like she said at the beginning, she was very reluctant to do this, having, left the profession many years ago, but you'll agree with me that she did a fantastic job of sharing the session. Thank you very much, Mrs. Z. I would also like to thank Dr. Ashraf, who joined us all the way from Dubai. You know what that would have meant if we were having this session physically. So that's what technology has done for us. We had Dr. Ashraf join us just with a click of the button, and he's here with us. Thank you for taking so much time. At the time we were engaging him, we were not sure that he could stay till the end, but I'm very excited that he was able to, and then he was able to take some of the questions. Mr. Rotimi Odushola, thank you so very much for sharing perspective on how the company secretary can actually be part of the process for recruiting directors to the board. That was indeed a very insightful intervention. Mr. Alausa Adewuyi, thank you so much for sharing perspectives on how we can safeguard confidentiality, particularly given the realities of the current normal. That's what our current normal is. And like we have all agreed, it's unlikely that things will actually go back to the way that we used to know them, not as far as meetings are concerned anyway. And thank you very much, Reverend Oguniro, for the very useful insights you gave to us. So lots of the time company secretaries feel, so this is it, where do I go from here? But the truth of the matter is that if we put our minds to it and we have the end in mind, like you advised, certainly the sky is but a stepping stone. We can do it if we think it. And of course, last but not the least is you, our wonderful audience. I see that people have stayed on till the very end. I thank you. We have totally overshot the time that we anticipated, but when you're having fun, time just seems to go past very quickly. So be rest assured the presentation slides will be sent to you. To the extent that we have your email addresses, we'll share the presentation slides. And if you want to watch this session, it's available on our YouTube channels. Please follow us on all our social media platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, and of course, Twitter, Facebook, and like us on our YouTube channel. Without much ado, I will like to just thank you all very much for staying with us till the end of this event. And we look forward to seeing you at all our events going forward. We'll share with you our training calendar that will let you see what other events we have lined up for the rest of the year. And so this time next year will be our 9th edition of the Company Secretaries Roundtable. We continue to raise the bar, and we look forward to seeing you then. So until then, and until the other events that we have for the rest of the year, do have yourselves a wonderful day. Thank you very much. Finally, I forgot to mention that the link to the feedback is in the chat box. If you haven't done so, we'd like to hear from you so that we'll know how this has gone and what you'd like to see us do better next time. We'll also share the link when we're sending you the slides. So feedback is important to us because we like to get better every year. Thank you very much, and God bless.
Thank you, DCSL.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Very
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.